Well, good morning, everybody. This is a very packed room. Thank you all for coming. All right, my name is Dr. Bethany Simunich. I'm from Kent State University, where I'm the Director of Online Pedagogy and Research. And I want you to think of this presentation as data for the rest of us. This is not for statisticians. This is not for your institutional folks that are looking at all that data. This is for faculty, instructional designers, and those of us that want to help interpret that data and use it for continuous quality improvement. Right? So let me see who's here in the room. Raise your hand if you are faculty. All right. How about instructional designers or other DL staff? Fantastic. Administrators. All right. Wonderful mix. Okay. So we're going to bring all of those perspectives to bear today. And here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to identify different types of data to collect for continuous quality improvement, and then also common obstacles maybe to getting the data that we want, or maybe barriers even to that interpretation. And throughout that, we're going to talk about interpreting data and then how to use it to improve our online learning. Okay? Right? You can resonate with this. We're drowning in data. It's not as though we have a lack of numbers, right? We have data from our course. So we have grades from students, formative and summative assessments. We have information from the LMS on usage data. We have other types of institutional data like drop, fail, withdrawal rates. We're not at a lack for numbers, but what we have to ask ourselves is it meaningful? Is it telling us the information that we need in order to make improvements to our course so that our students can have better learning, right? And is it also the data that we need, or is there new data that we have to collect and consider that really right now is not being looked at? So that's really the key, that interpretation and really deciding whether or not what you have is useful and whether you need something different in order to make it more useful to improve your courses. So remember that data are not statistics, they are not research, they are individual pieces of factual information. Okay, so sometimes administrators will say to me, well, you know, I have enrollment data and I have DFW rates and I have these things and, you know, let's do some research around it. Those numbers are just the start. You really have to decide first, well, what do you want to know? Why do you want to know that? And how are you going to use that information? So it's really dependent on our interpretation and analysis. Okay. It's also important to really avoid this rush to judgment. So sometimes maybe we're looking at the numbers in a course, maybe it's student grades, and we see them fall, and immediately we think, what did I do wrong, right? What's wrong with my course design? Or what didn't I do as an instructor? Why are those grades so low? Maybe it's not anything in the delivery. Maybe there's other things going on. Okay, so I'm going to talk about little data stories throughout this because I really want to put it in context that most of us are familiar with and that we deal with every day. So this is our first data story. We have Michael. He's teaching an introductory level, larger enrollment, 100% online chemistry course. Okay, his institution pulls that data on drop, fail, withdrawal rates and finds that in his course, they have a really high DFW rate. And that really impacts his performance evaluation. So he's getting worried. You know, am I going to be penalized because I have high DFW rates in my course? What do you think might be going on here? Should we just make the assumption it's Michael's teaching? So I want to hear from you. This is a participatory session, right? There's enough of you in the room and enough of you at home. So if you're on Zoom, you can type in the chat and we'll get that information. What do you think is going on here? What other information might you need? Yeah.
Really are the freshmen, are the sophomores, or the seniors. They may get into it. I'm sorry. They may sign up for the course first week and look and say, "Oh wow, this is not what I thought."
Right.
So we need to know about the students. We know their background.
Right. So knowing the students, knowing maybe where they are when they come in the course as far as their level of preparedness, right? What else might be going on here? Yes.
You need a good algebra background. So
right. So they may not just be prepared for online learning in general or this level in general, but there may also be a particular skill deficit. Okay, wonderful information. So looking at this a little bit differently, one thing that this institution could do is to look at those DFW rates over time. So what does the historical data tell us on that, right? Is this just a particular instance? Did it just happen now? Was there a catalyst for it? Or is this something that's been consistent over time? And then also correlate that by level of student preparedness. So this is an actual example that was written up. West Virginia University really had this situation, right? And for their students coming in, they assigned this level of preparedness based on this institutional rating. So highest was IR1, lowest was IR5. And then looking at whether or not if students have this low level of preparedness and whether or not that correlates with those high DFW rates. They might then consider an orientation to address some of those student needs and kind of fill in some of those gaps. If they're not correlated with low preparedness, what else might be going on? At that point, then maybe we'll look at the design of the course, we'll look at the teaching of the course, maybe the course load of the students. Are they taking too many courses and they really just can't do the work even if they're able to do the work? Right? So in this particular situation, initially they thought, well, it is that preparedness and that's all that's going on here, and let's introduce like a preparatory course. That didn't quite cut it, right? So they also realized that they needed some more information. And they augmented that by doing interviews with the faculty, asking them, what do you think is going on in these chemistry courses? And all of the faculty identified that there was a particular struggle, and it was exactly what you said over here. It was a skill gap, right? So it was a particular skill gap that they were missing. And they also combined that with focus groups from students, asking the students, what's going on? What do you need? How can we help you improve in these courses? Okay, so it was a lack of essential math skills. That's amazing that you hit the nail right on the head. And so their solution then was to split the course into two segments. You have the first half and you have the second half. If students don't do well in that first half, that second half then becomes a different type of course and they get the remediation that they need. And the next semester they can matriculate back into the course and complete it. If they do well in that first section, they can then continue on and finish that chemistry course, right? Those are things that would not have been revealed simply from those DFW rates. Those are things that needed faculty interviews. They needed those student focus groups. They needed that different lens to really figure out what was going on and what that institution needed to do to support their students. So really, when you're thinking about your data, start by thinking about what your strategy is for the data. Step back and strategize. Consider, what data do you already have, right? So most of us know the data that we have in our courses, or you're familiar with the LMS data that you might have, but also find out from the start. So this is a big takeaway and maybe one of your next steps. What other data does your institution collect? Right? So that if you know that you need data and you're making an assumption the entire time that it's being collected, it may not be, right? Find out from the start what's being collected and what are the limitations of that data, meaning what can't it tell you, right? We're looking for the full picture. The full picture is what allows us that full interpretation and then a really sensible application that can lead to better student learning. So what new data do you need to collect? Why? Why do you want to collect it and how? Is it going to be those faculty interviews? Is it going to be student focus groups? Is it going to be survey data? There's lots of ways to get the information that we need. Sometimes it's also looking at the pragmatics. What can we do within our institutions, right? So what's the best way to collect it? And then at that point, we can start to think about how are we going to interpret it, right? So it's very similar for when we're trying to formulate even a research project, and we start out with what we want to know. And then we really have to gather that information to see if we have the information that will allow us to make those good decisions. So some examples of data that we can collect for continuous quality improvement. Data from student assessment, and that includes both formative and summative assessment, right? So those knowledge check quizzes that we put in our courses, those smaller assignments that are intended to allow us to give feedback for student improvement, and then those larger summative assessments. LMS data. So we have usage data, typically clicks. We have some early alert systems. There are some things that are pretty common across all of those LMS platforms. Institutional data, so data on retention, completion, DFW rates, things such as that. Student evaluations. So we have student evaluations of instruction. How many of you also collect other types of student feedback, whether it's in your course or institution-wide? Okay, for those of you who do, that's amazing. For those of you that don't, let's start thinking about how we can get more information from our students, right? We're putting all this time in for our students, and yet sometimes we don't spend the time to also ask them, is it working? What else do you need from us, right? Instructor feedback. How many of you at your institutions collect feedback from your faculty, right? Very good thing to think about, especially if there are several faculty that are teaching sections of the same course. Are they having differences, right? Do they see differences in the student performance? Why? Maybe it's an aspect of delivery, maybe it's something else. Faculty and professional development, attendance and feedback, right? When I talk to folks about QM research, this is one of the many things, one of the top 3 things probably that they really want to look at. We have a lot of efforts towards faculty development, right? We host APP QMR workshops and IYOC workshops. We take QM workshops online. Don't you want to know if they're making a difference? Don't you want to know if your faculty find them valuable and how they're applying them? How many of you collect information and feedback for your faculty development efforts? Okay, a few of you. All right, something else to think about. So we have another data story. It's on student evaluations, right? So those SEIs. So we have Pat. She's teaching an accelerated course, 5 weeks, 100% online. It's a sociology course, but it's also writing intensive, okay? A lot of writing, short amount of time. She got her SEIs back, and the response rate was low. Right? Most of us have experienced that. She had 20 students in the course, only 3 filled out the evaluations. Despite the fact that most of the students in the course did very well grade-wise, A's and B's, the SEIs that she did get back, they were very poor, right? So one student just rated everything low and said Pat was the worst teacher, right? What might be going on here? Do we just assume it's Pat?
Being writing intensive, she probably had to take time to give quality feedback, and the students might not be getting that feeling like they're getting the feedback for a 5-week course.
Right. So it's an accelerated course. Students are doing a lot of writing, and if students are doing a lot of writing, you know that that's a high grading and feedback load for that instructor. Does she have the time to get it back to them in time so that they could apply that feedback in their future efforts? That might be very difficult in a 5-week course, right?
It depends on what, I think it depends on what questions are being asked, because there's a difference between did you meet the objectives, or did you learn a lot, and do you like this class?
Yes, absolutely. So let's go back to the questions that are on those student evaluation of instructions, right? I've seen questions in online for online courses that ask about the physical facilities of the institution, right? That doesn't give us a lot of good information for students' experiences in those courses. Yeah.
Negative views.
Yes.
So, we are missing certain things that might feel a lot better with the course.
Absolutely. So anybody that has taught, you have been in this situation, right? Where it's the students maybe that had an issue or had a complaint, and those are the only ones maybe that fill out those student evaluations of instructions. And you're kind of sitting there on the other end saying, but that's not the full picture. I swear there were students that loved this course and they did well, right? We can't capture that data. The course is already gone. Yes. You became the microphone person, yeah.
It may be how they capture the evaluation, is if it's done on paper or whether it's done electronically. I know that's a big thing with our faculty. We've gone now to all electronic, and they feel the students don't really give them the feedback on the electronic evaluations than they do the paper and pencil ones. So how they get the data.
Absolutely. So we know historically that when we do those online SEIs, we do have that lower response rate typically. And we have a question right behind you. And sometimes if we had it in class, we would have that dedicated time where all students then have to fill it out. So it could be just, yes, only a couple students self-selected to fill it out then. Yes.
No, my comment was even, I mean, this is a very small sample, so that would be to me the main thing. But even with even when you have a larger sample, if you have some students that they grade everything on a low grade, I would totally put them
Right,
Not that, you know, they can be upset with absolutely everything,
right.
but I think when you get those people, it's like, they're not thinking, they're just very upset.
They're upset. Right, right.
And-
So if I were Pat, I would definitely have a moment of like, what? It was all bad, really? Come on, right? And that kind of hits you in the gut. But also, yeah, that's a very big clue that that student rated everything low. It was just kind of looking at those, you know, bubble dots going right down the line. They were upset. Does that truly reflect the experience that they had in the course? Does it reflect their learning? Or are they upset about something else? Right? So a different approach to this might be, well, we have this accelerated format, and it's a very short accelerated format, right? It's not an 8-week, it's not a 7-week, it's a 5-week, and it's writing intensive, right? So if there is a full-term counterpart, we could also start by comparing the full-term counterpart and the accelerated course. Do we see the same differences in those SEIs, assuming that it is the same instructor, right? Do we see any differences in grades? So is part of this due to the format of the course? Right? When you add on that layer that it's writing intensive, you also need to look at students' level of preparedness for college level writing, which you may have time to really mentor students through in a full term course. In 5 weeks, you really need to come in with those skills, right? Because those assignments are coming hard and fast, and that instructor has to get that feedback back very quickly to students. And that leads us to point 3, which you brought up, the timing and sequencing. Right? So it could be something that we could address via the design of the course. We have to look at how those assignments are spaced out. And one way you can really do this, if you're a faculty member, is create a calendar for yourself. On that calendar, first put the due dates for your course, right? Back up a couple days and make a note for yourself that you want to post an announcement reminder about those assignments, add some additional information. But the crucial thing here also is for you to put, when do I have to have those assignments back with feedback so that students can utilize that information on a future assignment, right? And if you have tasked yourself with completing 65 college level research papers in 2 days, you know, on the draft, because then students get 1 day to implement your feedback and make improvements before they turn in their final, is that reasonable? No, it's not going to work for you and the students.
I was just going to share that distributed paper, to your point about instruction science, is about a nursing course.
Okay.
With the students were all practicing nurses who are going for their BSN. And they had, when they looked at it, what they had found was exogenous to the course, the way the course was scheduled and the assignments were scheduled, they had their major test. They had a very small testing window, and most of those nurses were, you know, doing shift work, and that testing window fell after they had a full day of, you know, 24 hours or 12 hours of being on shift, and then they only had 12 hours subsequent to that to complete the test. And of course, none of that was known. They just knew that the students were asking for like extensions. And then when they found, when they gave them they stopped giving them extensions, they just made the time period longer for being able to take that test. And so not only did the complaints go down, but the grades on that test went up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of being
And that
able
was
to
a
figure it
small
out.
adjustment of timing.
That's all it was.
Right? And what if they had not asked those students what's really going on, right? We might have made the assumption, oh, well, students are lazy, they're not doing the work, and they signed on for this, and they really need to set their schedule. And here it was working professionals where they had just finished a very long shift, and really what they needed was a little bit of consideration for that to do well, right? So also augment this then with student feedback and instructor feedback from the course. One thing that you can do, especially in terms of workload, when you're trying to collect additional information from students, right? Because most of us have been in the situation where we do not get back enough information from those SEIs. That response rate is not high. One thing you can do is put in some anonymous student surveys in your course, especially if it's the first time that you've taught the course or you've just redesigned the course and maybe you're testing out some new assessments or something like that. You can put an anonymous, very short survey at the end of each module. Also maybe do a midterm check-in and a final check-in, right? But one of the things you do want to do is look at the workload in the course, right? So if it's a 15-week, 3-credit, fully online course, kind of calculate it in your mind as students should be spending a total amount of time of about 9 hours per week in that course. And that's not just on the content or just on the assignments, that's in total. And that's kind of how we have to think of it for online, right? So you can do a calculation of this workload when you design your course. There's some great rigor calculators online. You can look at things like, well, how many pages am I asking them to read? How, you know, the time length of the videos, but then also remember to calculate in time for comprehension and reflection and application. So when students watch your online lecture, maybe they want to go back and take notes on it. When they do the assignment, they will take longer than you think they will, because we have an expert blind spot here and we think, well, how long would it take me to do that assignment? You know, the one I created that's in my field, right? That I'm going to grade, right? Students are brand new to this material. You have to pad that a little bit with time and then ask students, how'd I do? Did I hit the mark? How long did it take for you to work through this entire module? And see if you're within that range. And then get an idea about their expectations. How much did you think this workload was? Too much? Not enough, right? If they're saying that it's too much, and yet they're also saying that they spent about 7 hours per week in that course, that tells you that we need to do a better job communicating to students what that workload is coming in, right? How many of you have had online students and they feel, oh, it's going to be a lot less time, right? I just do the outside of class work from the face-to-face courses and I can do it in my pajamas from home, right? A lot less work online. It's not. It's more work, right? And they have to develop skills they may not have, right? So know what your students also valued in that course so that if you get this information back and you realize the majority, overwhelmingly, are spending 20 hours per week in that course, right? You know you're going to have to trim some things, but you don't want to cut those things that students find the most valuable to their learning. So ask them which pieces of instructional material were the most valuable to you and why, which assignments were the most helpful to your learning and why. Yes, back here.
I just wanted to give a shout out
Yes.
as to what a great idea this is. I use this kind of activity in my courses. I added it to my promotion and tenure application to document that I was actually meeting accreditation requirements for contact hours. And I also turn this back on students around midterm so that they can reflect on what was most helpful to them. And it helps them with some of those metacognitive awareness skills so that they can see how they're progressing and where they need to spend more time on what is helpful and what is not. So outstanding idea.
So using this to also help our students become more self-directed in their learning, right? Self-directed learners. Amazing. Okay. Also ask your students for feedback on the design of the course. Those SEIs very, very rarely give us information about the design. And yet here we are at a conference talking about quality design. How many of you ask your students for feedback on the design of the course? Not your teaching, the design. Many of you do. Good. So ask your students a question like this. Again, we're at that modular level. Do the assignments have clear and explicit instructions? Did you know what to do? Did you know how you were going to be evaluated, right? And how it connected to those learning outcomes. A lot of times we simply don't give students enough information about the assignments or how they'll be evaluated. When we have assignments face-to-face and you have your assignment prompt in your face-to-face course, do you hand out that assignment prompt and then just go on to something else? What do? You discuss it, you take questions, you go through it, you might pull up an example. You give, whether you realize it or not, very crucial information to help students succeed on that assignment. Are you giving your online students that same level of information? Right? Something to think about. And this connects to QM standards. So we have standard 3.3, specific and descriptive criteria provided for the evaluation of students' work. And then also 2.4, that relationship between the learning objectives and the learning activities is made clear to students. And 3.1 as well, that alignment standard for our assessments, right? So we put in all this good work to meet these standards. Let's ask our students how we're doing. Also ask them about the timing assignments because that was an issue potentially in that accelerated course, right? Did they have time to improve their work And this also relates to 5.3, you as the instructor, your plan for interacting. Did they get your feedback in time to improve their work, right? So there's two things going on there. They want to have that practice learning activity so that they could get your feedback when it matters, when it's crucial, so that they could then improve it for that true assessment.
I wanted to share that if people haven't heard of it, if you're interested in assignment design, look up Tilt Higher Ed and the
Tilt Higher Ed.
transparent assignment design framework.
Oh, okay.
There's some phenomenal research going on how it affects freshman learning and retention and
Awesome.
underserved students, but it will help online instructors design assignments.
As well. Wonderful. Thank you. You want to say it one more time?
The website is tilt, T-I-L-T, highered.com. And all the information's on the website. It's a
Wonderful. Thank you.
great resource.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk more about some potential issues and obstacles that we might encounter when we're trying to collect the data that we need and then also interpret and apply it. Know the limitations of your data. So as I mentioned, it's important to keep in mind that data are just facts, usually numerical, right? But they're really dependent on your interpretation to be used, and they don't tell us the whole story. That's really important to come into this whole process with. Some data, so we already talked a little bit about student and instructor feedback, it needs a purposeful effort. It either needs faculty really saying, I'm going to do this for myself in the course, or bringing that up to the institutional level and say, how can we do this as an institution? How can we better hear the voices of our students? If you are using data for your independent research, really consider your data needs in advance, right? Far too often, especially when we're doing research and online learning, we know what we want to research. We know what the research question is. We do the lit review. We have everything designed and set up. Everything goes beautifully, right? And then we realize when we're far down into that process, we actually can't get the data that we need, right? If your research, for example, is dependent on getting student grades, you may not be able to get student grades, right? Have those preliminary conversations with your institutional review boards, have those preliminary conversations with other folks in your department, in your institution, so that you know that you're not essentially wasting your time by designing a study that you cannot carry out because you can't get the data that you need. LMS data. So I think when we realized we can get data from the LMS, initially a lot of us were excited, right? Because we thought more data, we can drown a little bit more. But here's especially a place where we have to ask ourselves, what is that data? What is it telling us? What are the limitations? What is it not telling us? So we have use and course access data, right? These are things that definitely we want to check that first week of the course. Has everybody logged in? Those students that have not logged in, reach out to them. Did you know this was an online course? Did you know how to log in, right? We have all had those students. Activity log and views, okay? Clicks, right? Activity completion, that's a really good thing to see if we see that there are students that are not completing the assignments on time, or there's some longer data there throughout the course where consistently they're not completing assignments on time. That's another cue to us that we could reach out to them, say, is there any other type of help or support I could offer? Are you confused? Let's set up an appointment during my office hours. Research tells us that online students do not reach out proactively, by and large. They do not reach out to their professors like when they're in a face-to-face class. That has to do also a lot with face-to-face classes. Do your students come to your office hours if they're face-to-face students, or do they address you before and after class? Hey, quick question. How many of you have office hours? Lines out the door. Good for you, and I would like to talk to you after this session. Right? Normally when I had students in my office hours, it was because it was past the midpoint of the semester. They realized they weren't doing well, and all of a sudden they were like, hey, how can I get that grade up, right? But normally you have those questions before and after class because it's a low entry barrier, right? It kind of flattens that relationship between learners and instructors a little bit. Online, those students not only have that entry barrier, it's like an office hour, but they are reaching out to somebody that they potentially have never met. They may not have that relationship or connection to you. It is a much bigger ask of our students. That's why we really need to do a lot better job of reaching out to them, right? We have those early alert systems that are designed to kind of cue us in if students are missing deadlines, and then also some reports that are geared more towards learner engagement. So we have another data story, LMS data. So we have a college that wants to gather data on student engagement in online courses. They gather data from the LMS on time spent, and they see a very wide range, even within a single course. What do you think student engagement means to them in this situation? Or what does it mean to you? How might they interpret this data that they just got? What do you think? Mm-hmm.
Be better off looking at the time spent on individual assessments than overall time.
Okay. So we could narrow it down to different assessments. So maybe there's something that's going on with an individual assessment rather than holistically in the course. Okay?
The students, at least in our LMS, the students that may have appear to have spent an enormous amount of time in the class just left their browser window open.
What?
and
Say that
logged in.
again? What? What's that?
They may have just left their browser window
Wow,
open, and so it's logging the time.
Yeah.
But the minimum time seems meaningful, and then the time spent on individual assessments seems
Yes.
like that might be more meaningful.
Yeah. So if we see that click and they say, oh, look at that student, they've been in this course for a long time, they may have actually been engaging with their laundry or making their dinner or watching TV. They may not have been engaged with the course. Yes. Yes. Right. So they may have been engaged and they may have just been confused, and they're spending a lot of time because they're trying to figure things out, right? So that's a case where it could have been maybe it's clarity of instructions, right? Maybe there are some navigational or organizational issues in the course and they're just clicking on anything at that point. And then you think, wow, they're super engaged. They're super confused, right? They're super lost, right? Is this what engagement means? This is a term that I hear a lot, I discuss a lot. We all want to think about student engagement. What does that mean? Right? I don't think it means LMS clicks. I don't think engagement with a particular assessment means I clicked on it, I opened it, and then I submitted it. Right? So a different way to think about that, first of all, look and see, is there a correlation between that LMS data and grades? Okay, so very similar to what you were saying up here, they may, be spending more or less time, but let's see how that's affecting their performance or impacting their performance. And then consider these more robust views of engagement. So for most of us, engagement means active learning, applied learning, right? Students are really working with their new knowledge, they're applying it in new ways, you're getting up on those levels of Bloom's. That's a more robust and a much better picture of engagement, not just those LMS clicks. So consider General Standard 3, some of those specific review standards about your assessments in conjunction with General Standard 5. That's that learner interaction, active learning, applied learning. So when we're using data for continuous quality improvement, and then also for online learning research or even QM-focused research, some things to consider. Know what data you need from the start. We talked about that already a little bit, right? So maybe you're not doing a full research project, but you really, maybe it's SOTL research though, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and you are a faculty member looking at information from your own course and your own students, and you really want to utilize that to improve your course, to affect your teaching, to impact your students. Know what data you need. Consider what you want to know. And this may even be formalized as a research question. What do you want to know, right? You may even augment that and go the second step by saying, well, what do we already know? And look at some information that's out there. Start to read some of the research, right? In case you haven't noticed, we have a research table out there, okay? And that'll point you to some of the resources. So even if you want to stop by and say, this is a topic that I've been kind of mulling around in my head, I got some questions about it, can you help me locate some really good research that is going to support what I want to do here? right? So if conducting research around quality matters or other quality assurance efforts, plan some of these things in advance, because you may need to think first about what data you need so you can implement things in your course to get that data before it even runs. And on that note, another data story. Before and after, right? So this is a very common scenario. This is something that a lot of us want to do with our courses. When we get involved with QM, I had my before version. I revised it to meet standards. Now I have the after version. No, what happened, right? Is it a magic bullet? So we have our scenario here. So Omar's been teaching online for several years, 5 years, and he took the Improving Your Online Course workshop. He came out of that with that course improvement plan. He implemented things. He improved the course. He put it up for QM formal review. It met standards. It got QM certified. He is psyched. I would be psyched, right? So he's running that new version of the course, and he can't wait to see the grades in this new section, because he's hoping this is going to be the proof that I need. All that was worth it. I'm going to see a jump in those grades. What other information would he need to get the full picture of any grade changes? Do you expect automatically that he's going to see an increase in those grades? Why might not final grades provide this evidence that QM is a magic silver bullet? Right? Why? What's going on here?
Quality teacher to begin with. He was making the choice to go through and do professional development and certify his course. I'm sorry. If he was making the choices to, take professional development, improve his course, he was probably a dedicated teacher to begin with who was working hard to help his students. So he might not see that jump in the final grade. He might see it better in individual assessments.
Absolutely. Amazing point, right? So he was already a very dedicated, involved teacher. He had a lot of experience, but on his own, he went to the Improving Your Online course. He made those improvements in his course, right? So it could be it was a good course before even. What else might be going on? Yeah.
I'm not a ringer. I'm just gonna, I will just say that, sometimes what you're fixing in those courses have to do with the assessment. So the way that you were assessing in the pre-version may not be the same way that you're assessing in the. In fact, you may have introduced a more rigorous approach for the students. So it becomes very difficult to be able to say, the students may have very well be learning lots more, but you've changed your assessment.
Yes, that is such an important point. I want to say it again, right? And I want to say it through another story. One time an administrator asked me, okay, well, if I get all these courses QM certified, does that mean I'm going to see better grades from those students? And I said, well, you may not. Well, why? I thought QM was supposed to improve student learning. And I said, is what you're asking me, is this what you really want? Do you want me to help you design a course where all students have a very high likelihood of getting A's and B's? Is that what you want? He said, well, yeah, sure, I want all the students to get grades. I said, well, I can do that, right? We could have a very low level of rigor. Students can read something, take a quiz, right? Maybe go to a publisher's site, do some of those activities. Students probably aren't going to be involved a lot in their learning. They're not going to be able to apply a lot of what they're learning. It's going to be low rigor, but I can pretty much guarantee you the majority of those students are going to get high grades. Is that really what you want? Well, no, I really want quality learning. I really want students to apply what they're learning. I really want that cognitive presence. I want that application. I want that critical inquiry. And I said, well, then that's going to take time. And that's also going to take some additional support to help our students raise their level of performance, right? We can sometimes do revisions to our courses that create a much higher quality course that definitely will result in improved learning. But have we supported our students in changing themselves to be better students and to meet the new standards that we've set? Another question to ask ourselves. Yes.
I just think whatever he got in terms of results, statistically, he can't prove anything. I think that's the most important point. Even if his students went from 0 to 100, nothing is proved because there's no numbers there. So I think maybe if you could talk about just the samples and just to not try to prove anything with,
Right. So
even if you see wonderful results.
maybe we can't really prove anything. So even if we see that the grades were improved in that section, we are still making an assumption. Well, it was because of the QM certification, right? That may or may not be the case, right? Omar could have learned things during that Improving Your Online Course workshop that impacted his teaching, his delivery of the course. Yes, back there.
That's what I was pretty much going to think of saying is, so it might look better to him, but does it actually look better to the student? So is the student's perception of the course making and forcing the fact that they think that they can learn better, or is it just because it's QM certified? In the faculty sense, that would be satisfying to him, but is it satisfying to the student on their learning levels?
Ah, okay. So again, maybe trying to collect some additional student feedback to see, well, how are you receiving this course? How are you interacting with this course? I know we have one comment up here. You're getting your steps in today, Ray. Yay.
I'm just going to follow up on your comment that you can't prove anything statistically. When we, yes,
With
the
just
quality
this
measures.
scenario, yeah.
So what I started on a research is when we are looking at student learning and the quality, we are looking at it a very narrow scope, like how their grades have improved. But learning requires communication, engagement, feedback. So if we start looking at each component separately, for example, did the communication improve? So before my QM, I was getting on an average maybe 6 or 7 emails from students. Where do I find this? Or how are you going to grade it? So after the QM, I'm not kidding you, not making it up. How many of you remember Maytag Man? I felt exactly like that. There were no emails. Nobody's asking me. And I'm wondering if these people are even looking at the course. So for me, I think that was a big accomplishment. It happened as a result of aligning things.
Right.
It's not the grade, because remember the grade comes from the proper communication, the engagement, and the feedback. And then I did the next study on feedback.
Yeah.
And I looked at what are students saying. So what Bethany is talking about, I was surprised there were 2 assignments. One was on expansion of the universe, and the other one was solar system, are we alone? Requires a whole lot of research. And I thought the students are going to say, she's crazy, she just does these kind of things on a whim. But they, through their discussion with other students and feedback, said those were the 2 best activities. And yes, there were more worse activities in that course than they were best.
Yeah.
So I think.
And you are identifying a lot of things. So let me advance to the next slide, because here's a different approach, and it's many of the things that you just spoke about. But first of all, we need to get that full picture of before, right? We don't know. It's not just getting the grades from before and looking at then the grades in the after version. We don't know what changes were made to that course unless we have the full picture of the before version, and then we document each and every change that was made in order to improve that course to meet QM standards, right? Yes, Ron.
QM process may change the instructor's impression of or intention. That instructor expectations may actually increase, and then students are not matching up to that, and so grades actually wind up going down. Now the instructor understands and has articulated their objectives in the course, perhaps better than they did, and they can see more the gaps. This is part, of a continuum of change that needs to be factored in and there's feedback in both directions, student expectations and instructor expectations.
Yes, that's a crucial point, right? It's not just our expectations as the instructor, but what are your expectations from your students? What can they expect from you, and have we appropriately communicated that, right? Also consider these confounding variables. So how many of you have taken the APP QMR, applying the QM rubric workshop? Then you have seen the online quality pie, right? If not, it's on QM's website. But that shows all the different things that can contribute to student learning, to a quality course, aside from design, right? So QM and the QM rubric is focused on design, but there's delivery, the teaching of the course, right? There's the content of the course. Even among sections of the same course, the content could differ. It could still be aligned. It could all support students doing well in those assessments, but differences in instructional material could very well impact student learning and student grades, right? Student preparedness. So that has come up a lot. If we are increasing the quality of our course, have we prepared our students to take a higher quality course, to do well in a higher quality course? And then also LMS and institutional infrastructure. So all of you already said this now, gather student feedback, especially when you know that you're raising the quality of the course. Please talk to your students, whether it's via survey or you even reach out to your students a little bit via email, or maybe you know so or see some of them in person, or they come to office hours. Have some dedicated office hour sections about what are you still confused about? What other information would you still need? So those muddiest point papers or 1-minute papers that we might do face-to-face, you can do those online. You can even make them reflective journal assignments, right? Get that information from your students. And depending on how vital it is to you, you may want to attach points to it. You may want to make it a private reflective journal. You may want to say, complete this survey anonymously. I'll give you a couple points, because it's that important to me as the instructor to hear your voices and get your feedback so I can make further improvements to the course. Okay, so with that, I kind of want to end by thinking, how can QM help you? And talking about that, if you are doing research, if your institution is doing research, Quality Matters can help. How many of you know that there's a QM research library? Awesome, right? A database of articles. A lot of this is research that has informed the rubric. Some of it is tangential, but it's all online learning research. There's also a research toolkit, online, freely available. It will walk you step by step through this process, allow you to ask those good questions in the beginning so that you don't find yourself towards the end saying, I can't get this data, how am I going to do this, right? If you have an idea for a research topic, there's an online workshop 3 weeks long, the ABCs of Online Learning Research. If you have a topic, an idea, even a clear formulated research question, this is a fantastic place to be, right? Because we're going to workshop that idea, you're going to get feedback from your facilitator, from your colleagues, and by the end, you're going to have a more clear sketch of that design so that you could carry out the research. There's also QM's Director of Research. Kay, give a shout out. Yay. All right, so that's Dr. Kay Shattuck. She's QM's Director of Research. You can also reach out to her directly, right? If you have a research question or research comment, and I mentioned the research table that's there as well. So I'd like to close with a couple questions. We have just a couple minutes, but what are some new pieces of data that you're thinking now that you might want to collect that you are not currently collecting? What about data that maybe hasn't even been on our radar at all, like that faculty development data, right? And how can we really utilize this to have better institutional conversations so that when we're working with administrators or we're having those types of meetings and we get that report out, right? The retention, the enrollment, the DFW rates, how can we really have good discussions about that that takes it beyond the numbers, attaches appropriate meaning and interpretation to it, and then moves it forward to how can we use and apply this for student learning? So what are some of your thoughts now? What is some data that you think you might want to start collecting that you haven't been? Student readiness before the course. And is that general student readiness, or does that also talk about whether or not they are academically prepared for that course in particular?
Both for the online environment and also kind of what kind of prerequisites they have, what is their major, that sort of thing.
So have they had the appropriate prerequisite information? What's their major? And then general student preparedness. Is this your first online course? Do you need help with the LMS? One of the things that's coming out of research is one thing that can really largely impact students' success online is typing skills. Did you know that? Who would have thought, right? But think about all the typing that we do in online classes, and especially if we're in that 5-week writing intensive accelerated course, that could really matter with getting those assignments done. Yeah. Anybody really thinking now about collecting some of that faculty development data? Yeah, especially for those homegrown programs and sessions and workshops that you do, ask your faculty, was this meaningful? How are you applying it? Follow up with them. Those of you that are faculty developers, do that follow-up. A lot of times faculty, we get this good information, we want to apply it, we have the best of intentions, we know how we're going to do it, and what do we have a lack of? Time, right? Sometimes instructional designers, other folks at the institution can really help faculty make the changes that they want to make in their course and reduce that workload for them and reduce that time. Okay, speaking of time, we are out of time. All right, so thank you all very much. Thank you those of us at home that joined us. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you throughout the conference. Thanks.